My name is Jack Hess. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm the executive director of GSA. Had the privilege of working for the society for the past 11 years or so, and it's been a great experience. But the real people who run the society are the officers and counselors, and I'd like to introduce GSA President George Davis, who will be our MC for the afternoon. George?
What a beautiful day. Unbelievable. I'm a Tucson guy, and we have beautiful mountains in Tucson, but the Flatirons look gorgeous today, don't they? This idea of giving a little speech after people have started drinking beer, that's a new thing, you know? I wish that was happening at the University of Arizona. I'm teaching a class with 90 undergraduate students, and sometimes they look a little bit out of it, but they probably could use a beer once in a while. I attended my first GSA meeting when I was a junior in college, and I went to the College of Worcester in Ohio. We always say the College of Worcester in Ohio, not Worcester, Mass. And we road tripped to New York City. It was unbelievable. You know, went to the meeting, saw some of the heroes. I saw Marlin Billings from a distance. Even as a junior, I love structural geology, and it was just a great thing. And I think that today, as we gather here at headquarters, and you know, I don't think anybody knew exactly who was going to be coming here. You know, what was this all going to be like? But now that we see what it's all about, we see, not surprisingly, that the staff and officers of headquarters at Penrose Place are here, and if they've been doing a job. I mean, you walk the halls and see the posters, the halls and walls, the images, the textures, the designs, the videos. I think a little round of applause for all that was done in advance. And then there are a bunch of folks here who are here to work. I mean, maybe not right now, but tomorrow and the next day, you know, the board members, i.e. council members, plus division chairs and section chairs and committee chairs and others. But the real mystery was who else might be coming, you know? And it turns out, maybe not surprisingly, it seems to me in conversations in the halls, the folks that have come here for this open house are largely folks who have been attached to GSA in one way or another for a lot of years, and for which GSA has had a lot of impact, not only scientifically, but in terms of value systems, in terms of friendships, in terms of career length contact with people that they really like. And of course, the common denominator is love of geology, maps. People are talking about the maps in this building, these rock samples. That's how we get started. This little guy over here, maybe he's a rock collector. Does he collect a few rocks? I mean, I started collecting these rocks. I made him a little bit bashful, but rocks are good. You know, you need to collect a little amblygonite, a triclinic pentacoidal lithium aluminum fluoro phosphate. You know, that's the one. And these lithium minerals are really good these days. So I've got some prepared notes. It's going to get more boring with my prepared notes. But nonetheless, you know, there's some things to say. You know, that the ground preparation for the Geological Society of America was proposed in the August 1881 meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, you know, AAAS. And in 1888, the AAAS division that dealt with geology and geography voted to form the American Geological Society, the first meeting of which was held at Cornell University. Do we know that Suzanne Kay, who's president-elect, Cornell University, right here. So it's she will be presiding at the 125th Denver meeting. I mean, some things are charted, like predestination. I'm a Presbyterian, you know, from a long time ago. And what about geology and geography? Those two things used to go together just like that. The department I was in at Worcester as an undergraduate, the Department of Geology and Geography. Remember that? That's the way it was. And then geography took a brief nosedive. Can I say that? And then it's come back like gangbusters. you know, and as another one of these unifying disciplines like geosciences. But back to 1888, 13 geologists attended that meeting. The founders included the likes of James Hall, you know, and, you know, not to get too intimidated, but James Hall, God, I hope he doesn't see my resume, you know. And there's big photographs of the founders right somewhere in this building. I passed by the Winchell brothers. All these founders had this stuff hanging from their chin, you know, bearded men. The whole meeting was devoted to the business of organization. But the second meeting, 1889, held in New York City, at that meeting, the custom of presenting scientific papers became established. 6 papers were presented. And at that meeting, the name of the society was changed to the Geological Society of America. We had a big debate this morning in the Executive Council. Should "the" be capitalized? What does our policy say? Punctuation. It should be capitalized. It's copyrighted "the." So it creates a little issue, you know, when you're thinking about, am I a contender? You know, when people are trying to find your articles, they may be looking around T and not G. But anyway, that's another thing. Meeting attendance in 1889 was 13. 13. Meeting attendance increased to triple figures in 1911. That was the day my father was born, the year my father was born. It went to 4 figures in 1948. This October in Denver, we anticipate 7,500. If sequestration doesn't take hold, we anticipate 14,000. No, I'm teasing. 8,000. There were 100 members of the GSA in 1888. The number is now 25,500. But who's counting? 25,500. The purpose of the Geological Society of America back in the day, 1889, was proclaimed to be advancing geology. And the founders understood at that time that that advancement would take place predominantly through publications and meetings. 1889. The venerable, I never can find a chance to use the word venerable. You know, the venerable, it's a kind of a word they use in Durham, England. You know, the venerable core of GSA publications was the GSA Bulletin. I mean, that was 1889, Volume 1. We now take for granted the continuity, the kind of the organization of geological publications, scientific publications. But prior to 1889, the publication and dissemination of findings and ideas haphazard, right? Studies were mostly supported by geologists' personal finances, the finances of wealthy patrons. This gives meaning to the fact, I shouldn't disclose this, but my advisor at the University of Texas, Austin, when I was doing my master's degree, I'm this young guy, you know, barely knowing what's going on, and I'm his student, one of his students. And he confides in me, the students I like best are independently wealthy bachelors. That eliminated me on a couple of different counts. You know, I think he was talking about simplicity, you know, where the funding's coming from. One of my fellow students, Alston Boyd III, same advisor, Boyd III, it's now occurring to me that he had a private plane. He drove an XKE, had a Land Rover, had beautiful clothes in the field, and his white pants in the field never got dirty. How does this happen? Okay. 6 papers, as I said, were presented in the 1889 meeting. In Denver this fall, there'll be 4,500 papers presented, including posters. During the course of 259 topical sessions, 30 discipline sessions, 13 Par D symposia, 5 special sessions. If the 13 GSA founders were to attend the 2013, isn't that interesting, 13 and 13 annual meeting in Denver, they would be pleased that meetings and publications remain the core of what GSA is all about. They would see some old friends in titles of geological topics at this upcoming meetings. I'll quote a few. Great geological field trips. Understanding metamorphic processes. Will they ever be understood? Dinosaurs and diamonds. Peaks to plains, late Cenozoic landscape evolution of the Rocky Mountains and the Western Great Plains. Or how about current groundwater challenges in the Rocky Mountain region? They might have remembered the older groundwater challenges in the Rocky Mountain region. Our GSA founders would smile in recognition that geologists in 2013 still like to stuff sentences with jargon and complexity. I'll just pull one out of the, you can find this and other examples on the website. This is the name of a special session. I don't know who I'm offending right now, but I'm the president. Okay. Quote, origin of tectonic plates, plural, movement due to effect of the coupling of diurnal pulsating hydromagnetothermomechanical load, all hyphens in there, and forced convection system into the mantle generated from inside the Earth, I was thinking outside, based on, in capital letters, the pulsating mantle parenthetical Earth hypothesis. Now you want to get your paper in for that. There it is. Our founders would love it. I'll read it again, but there's not enough time. Okay, I think the founders would applaud the fact that GSA's vision is to be the premier geological society supporting the global community in scientific discovery, communication, and application of geoscience knowledge. They would be surprised at the breadth of the GSA mission to advance geoscience research and discovery, service to society, stewardship of the earth, and the geosciences profession. We would take their breath away in terms of the list of key components of GSA's global mission: scientific research, scientific communication, geological time, technological innovation, education, outreach, public policy, geological hazards, scientific integrity, sustainability, natural resources, professional development, workforce development, diverse community, philanthropy. We would explain to them that geology's relevance in modern society demands all of this. We are integral to everything, in a manner of speaking. They would see this reflected in titles of topical sessions planned for Denver 2013. Human response to climatic change, changes, natural disasters, and environmental overexploitation. Examining ancient adaptive strategies through the archaeological record. Carbon and landscape dynamics. Critical zone evolution. Impacts of land use change and disturbances on ecohydrology. Contaminant migration through the groundwater surface water interface. Geology for the common good. Now we're getting down to it in simple language. Sustainable resources for the 21st century. Changes in the undergraduate research experience over time. Geosciences across cultures and communities. Benefits and changes of diversity. The founders might even say to Boulder officials, you're fortunate to have a society such as GSA and its headquarters in Boulder. But if they did, we would say that feeling is mutual. We would explain that after many years of borrowed, owned, and rented offices and the difficulties of operating a society in New York City, the Big Apple, the society decided to move west. We moved into our own headquarters building in the autumn of 1972. Our street address, 3300 Penrose Place, was no accident. The staff arranged with the city administration to name the street in honor of the society's benefactor, Richard Alexander Fullerton Penrose, Jr. The building was specifically chosen to show how rich in color, form, and textures are the natural features of the earth. and they got that right. The factors favoring moving to New York, moving from New York to Boulder included, the first one's interesting, cost of living. Woo! Look at that one. Cost of living. What hasn't changed is availability of skilled personnel, proximity to strong universities and other geological centers, climate, city size, availability and cost of rental office space, living conditions, recreation. Did I tell you that my mentor in structural geology at the University of Arizona, who was a great field geologist, pronounced recreation, recreation? He would talk about the Jurassic recreation red beds. I think recreation is recreation, and recreation is new beginnings. And an organization like GSA with a changing environment and challenges is always having to recreate itself while sticking with the strengths and fundamentals. So I don't need to read a list, although I was going to, of all the amazing centers in and around Boulder and Golden. An incredible number of centers that relate to environmental science and Arctic and alpine and space and atmospheric and ocean and weather. And, you know, it's as if in 1972, somebody knew that geology was really going to grow up into the geosciences and begin to sprawl into so many different areas that are connected with all these things that for a long time we didn't think geology was connected to. I compare it to the tree ring laboratory in dendrochronology, which was born at University of Arizona by an astronomer. And for decades, dendrochronology seemed to be about figuring out how old a timber was in a Hopi ruin. And suddenly it's become, not suddenly, but the whole field has been refined to the point where we're talking about climate change, figuring out when volcanoes blew their top. How about forest fires in the past? Can we look at that in the tree ring record? I think the tree ring dendrochronology deal is a metaphor for what geology has done and emerged. And I think the positioning strategically of GSA in Boulder is more important than it ever was. And if we haven't made the connections that we should have made, I think those connections have to be made to solve problems. So, there's more, but we would simply end by saying to the GSA founders who are here, bearded, we would say, hey, Google Wikipedia, that tells the story, and learn that the city of Boulder is rated #1 happiest city, 1 brainiest city, 1 top health well-being index, 1 best city to raise an outdoor kid, Backpacker magazine, 1 America's top 25 towns to live well, Forbes, 1 America's, this is a new adjective, hang on, foodiest town, Bon Appetit magazine. Indeed, Boulder and GSA go together really well. Thank you. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Brandon Rattiner. Where's Brandon? Right here. Let me introduce you, who serves as the Denver Metro Area Regional Director for U.S. Senator Mark Udall, Colorado. With past positions at the Colorado Coalition of Land Trusts and El Pomar Foundation, he's focused on community development, civic engagement, particularly interested in helping the Denver metro region and Colorado develop in a way consistent with the needs and identities of current communities. Brandon represents Senator Mark Udall, who was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2008. Prior to that, he represented the state's 2nd Congressional District for 5 terms, 1999 to 2008. He also served one term in the Colorado State Legislature as a member of the General Assembly, 97 to 99, representing the 13th District, which encompassed the community of Longmont and parts of southern Boulder County. In the U.S. Senate, Senator Udall serves on 3 committees: Armed Services, Energy, Natural Resources, and the Select Committee on Intelligence. Reinforcing his priority of protecting our western lands, Senator Udall chairs the National Parks Subcommittee of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Senator Udall's committee assignments give him a platform to address many issues important to Colorado, including national security, energy, the economy, clean energy jobs, and natural resources. Thank you.
Well, to start, I am not as funny as George, so feel free to tune out for a little while, and I will do my best. The senator is really sorry that he's not able to be here today. Unfortunately, he's not in the state of Colorado, so he wrote a letter, and I'm going to read that on his behalf, so my apologies about looking down at the sheet so often, but here we go. So, I'm sorry I'm not able to join you today, but I'm thrilled to see that so many of our nation's most talented thinkers and doers are here to celebrate an organization so crucial to the advancement of our scientific understanding. 125 years in business is a really long time, and I want to wish you all my sincerest congratulations on this remarkable anniversary. Your institution's enormous contributions to science, the economy, and our planet are worthy of commendation. When GSA moved to Boulder in the early 70s, it helped solidify Colorado as a premier destination for those hoping to contribute to a smarter, more innovative world. And I believe this reputation is critical to our success. And I want to personally thank GSA for this foresight. All across Colorado, companies, universities, and federal laboratories are making critical advances in science, technology, educating future generations of engineers, researchers, CEOs, and teachers all in the process. This base of talent is no question the catalyst for creating and recruiting new businesses to the state. That's why organizations like the GSA are so important, because your hard work and limitless imagination will pave the way for the next generation of research and success. As the senior senator from Colorado, I've witnessed firsthand the success stories that come about when you invest and support great talent. And that's why I'll continue working to ensure Colorado remains a national leader in this effort. Science touches everything we do in Colorado and across the country, and we are already seeing the fruits of being pro-science within the state, with our thriving aerospace, alternative energy industries, bioscience industries, startup industries, and the list goes on. I am proud to stand with the GSA today and renew my commitment to these critical endeavors. Even in challenging budgetary times, we must keep America strong by supporting real progress through innovation. That's why I'm a strong supporter of America Competes legislation, which included investments in science, technology, and STEM education to enhance America's global competitiveness. Congress and our partners in the state legislature need to ensure that we are supporting STEM education. As the co-founder of the House STEM Education Caucus and co-chairman of its equivalent in the Senate, I know that STEM education will help ensure that we do not fall behind China, India, and our other competitors in the global innovation race. In these times of budget cuts and fiscal discipline, continuing our research and development work from funding federal labs to encouraging public-private partnerships remains a personal crucial priority. I have fought hard to avert the sequester by leading a bipartisan delegation letter calling for balanced deficit reduction, delivering speeches and holding countless meetings with stakeholders, and I continue to stand by my assessment that this is bad public policy. I will keep pushing my colleagues to bridge the partisan divide and find common ground, but in the meantime, we have got to deal with the indiscriminate and arbitrary cuts sequestration is levied on our national security, research and development, and other domestic programs. We have to be smart. That's why I introduced a bill with Senator Susan Collins, a Republican from Maine, to ensure that the White House and Congress work together to replace arbitrary cuts with smarter, focused spending restrictions. Our future as a state and as a nation rests on our ability to stay on the cutting edge, to remain the world leader in discovery and innovation. That's why your work, from your publications to your activism, remains so vital to our scientific and economic future. I may not have any idea about the technicalities of the work that you do, but I sure understand the importance and the impacts it has on our economy, our job creation, and America's future. I applaud your efforts and commend your team. Thank you again for allowing me to speak here today, and congratulations on this joyous occasion. I wish you nothing but more years of success in the future. Senator Mark Udall.
Excellent. It's now my pleasure to introduce Andrew Schultheiss, who is the District Director for Congressman Jared Polis. He's served in this capacity for 4 years. Prior to this position, he was president of Jovian P4 and spent 7 years with the League of Conservation Voters. Andrew represents Representative Polis, who was elected to the United States Congress in the 2nd Congressional District of Colorado in 2008. Representative Polis serves on the powerful Committee on Rules, the Committee on Education and Workforce, and the House Democratic Steering and Policy Committee. Representative Polis believes that education is the single most meaningful investment America can make in its economic future and in its people. He also works with Democrats and Republicans to protect Colorado and the world's natural beauty and environment. While still attending Princeton University, Polis co-founded his first company, American Information Systems, a success he followed with the launching of BlueMountain.com and ProFlowers.com. He has been named an Entrepreneur of the Year by Ernst & Young. Andy, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, George. And in a million years, I could never have guessed that the bar's been open for a while here. You're a terrific and very funny speaker. Perhaps I should have done what Brandon had Senator Udall do and have the congressman write a letter, but I didn't. So I'm gonna wing it and try to channel him a little bit and think about what Jared would have said on an occasion like this. 125 years. It's a long, long time. One would almost say a geological amount of time. And one of the institutions in America that's been around a little longer, the United States Congress, unfortunately not as effective or efficient as GSA these days. But the congressman's working at it, and that's what he's doing right now. I'm sure he would rather be out here in beautiful outdoors in Boulder. What would he say to an organization like GSA, an august, that's another good word, organization like GSA? I think what he would say is, please, please, please keep at it. The environment in Washington, policymaking right now, especially for a couple of geeks like me and Jared, is frustrating in at least one way, actually in many ways, but in one way in particular. We hear a lot from our friends who oppose some of the policies we support, that the science may say this or that, but they don't believe it. And you know, there are thousands of scientists rolling in their graves, and my father isn't dead yet, but he's a scientist, and he would be rolling in his grave if he were. It's not a matter of belief, it is or it isn't, and that small fact seems to be lost on a lot of political America these days, and it's up to you and to your colleagues in the other organizations of scientists, the atmospheric scientists and the Arctic scientists and the hydrologists and everybody else, to keep at it and make sure that changes. Because we'll never solve global warming if that doesn't change. We will never have a sane oil and gas exploration policy if that doesn't change. There's a million things that need to happen and won't until that changes. So I think that's the first thing Jared would say. And the second thing he would say is, sequester's a bear. I'm on furlough on Monday. That's like the least of our problems. The loss of science funding, the loss of slots for Head Start kids who are now no longer going to have that Head Start when they enter into school and might not become great scientists as a result when they come out the other end of it. All of these things are huge impacts on our future. And all for a very minor, in fact, possibly even negative impact on our budget deficit. It needs to change, and I thought Senator Udall's words were very eloquent on that, and we associate ourselves highly with them. So anyway, I hope I'm not being a downer. Keep up the great work. You guys are great. You know, I've never been to this facility before. It's gorgeous, and I'll be coming back. And thank you very much for inviting us.
Yeah. Wonderful channeling. It was good. And, you know, it is a downer. I mean, the impacts of the sequestration, kind of indiscriminate, let's cut, is just unbelievable. And that's the situation we're in right now. My pleasure to introduce Lisa Morgan Morzell, longtime GSA member. Where are you? Right here, okay. And research geologist at the U.S. Geological Survey, a self-proclaimed strong field geologist. I mean, that's where it's at. Leading a field trip to Yellowstone in October. Unbelievable. Sign up now. Her professional interests lie in the geology and geophysics of volcanic terrains, currently working with the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory. Enviable. She's in her 14th year as a member of the Boulder City Council, currently serves as mayor pro tem. She also served on the planning committee for today's event. Chairman of the committee. As a member of City Council, Lisa has been party to a series of scientific talks by local experts designed to inform the community about climate change and global warming. In that context, she was responsible for nominating Brad Udall to present his important work as our featured speaker today. I'd like to turn the program over to Lisa to introduce Brad Udall to you. Thank you so much.
Well, what a beautiful day we have, and I am so happy that GSA is in Boulder, since I live here, and I only live a mile away, so when I want to come to this building, I just get on my bike and just ride across on our bike paths, and here I am. I am proud to introduce Brad Udall, the new director of the Getches-Wilkinson Center for Natural Resources, Energy, and the Environment at the CU School of Law. Brad was, until very recently, director of CU Boulder NOAA Western Water Assessment. He has held a research faculty position for over 10 years at CU's Cooperative Institute for Research in the Environmental Sciences. He has an engineering degree from Stanford University and an MBA from CSU. Brad was formerly a consulting sorry, Brad, I tried to make you into a geologist, but we'll get you soon enough. At least you're working on good earth science problems. Brad was formerly a consulting engineer and managing partner at Hydrosphere Resource Consultants. His expertise in hydrology and Western policy issues has led him to write extensively on issues of climate change, including being a contributing author and expert reviewer for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, the lead author on water sector chapter of the recently released Global Climate Change Impacts in the United States, a publication of the United States Global Change Research Program, and one of several authors for a recent climate change report for the state of Colorado. Brad has provided congressional testimony, input to several National Academy of Science panels, and has given hundreds of talks on climate change impacts. Brad serves on the Water Research Foundation's expert panel on climate change. Brad has spent time recently as a visiting scholar in Southern Australia, looking at how Australian water reforms might be applied in the United States. Please join me to invite Brad up to the podium to talk about water implications of climate change.
So I'm tempted to follow Andy here and ditch my talk and channel my brother Mark. I've been known to say on most days Mark is my loving older brother, and other days I've never heard of him. So there are literally hundreds of people, I would say, in the Front Range that could give this talk, and it's truly an honor to be here at your 125th anniversary to give it. And I've got 15 quick slides. I want to acknowledge before I start Rich Reynolds, who's actually been involved in some of the work I'm going to talk about on Dust on Snow. And your membership, I mean, you guys know how important you are. I'm just going to say that to everything that goes on in the climate realm right now. And it's terrific to have you all here in Boulder. I actually want to start with a real live true story. And it may seem a little obscure, but I think you'll get the point. So in 1981, British Airways Flight 9 at midnight was over Indonesia. And it had the unfortunate event of encountering a cloud of volcanic ash. This was actually one of the first times this ever happened. And on this giant 747 with, 350 people aboard, all 4 engines shut down. And it was eerily quiet in the cabin for about 4 minutes, at which point the captain came on and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a small problem. All 4 engines have stopped. We are doing our damnedest to get them restarted. We hope this does not cause you too much distress." The reason I love to tell this story is that it exhibits the fundamental concept of stationarity, that being that the past is the guide to the future. And the problem with water and climate change is we're going to violate that. All our historic records now, as we get further and further into the Anthropocene, are not nearly as valid as they were. And that throws everybody who manages our water resources into a tizzy. And really, that's one of the major problems with climate change and water. This image here is actually from the Roaring Fork last year above Aspen, and I had never, ever seen it this low. This is the 11th year of a drought in the Colorado River that's unprecedented. And I'll note that this isn't all just natural flow. This is the part of Trans-Mountain diversions as well, this low flow. And that's one of the other issues with water, is that water has a problem independent of climate change, right? And we add another stressor on it, and we have real excitement. So this is that report that I was involved in, and there's going to be a brand new version of this later this year. In fact, it just ended its review cycle. And I'm not going to dwell too much on it because it'll be superseded. But I'll tell you the interesting thing about these reports is you can go back and they don't really change. In fact, you can go back to the Charney report, the National Academy report in 1979. And what did they say 3C or a doubling of CO2 would get us? 3C change. That's right where we are today. So we know, and I guess a key message here is I like to say climate change is water change. Yeah, heat is a big deal, but the water cycle and climate change are joined at the hip. And the water cycle is the mechanism by which the Earth transports incredible amounts of heat from the equator to the poles. And it does this in terms of water vapor, and it does this in terms of large ocean currents, like the Gulf Stream. A warmer climate means more moisture holding capacity in the atmosphere, right? We're going to have a bigger sponge above our head that will hold more water, and when we wring it out, it's going to come out in more intense versions of what we've seen. We're going to have storm tracks move poleward. And there's certain areas in the planet that are particularly threatened: the Mediterranean, our American Southwest, Australia, places in South America, right at about the 30-degree parallel line, as these Hadley cells that determine these deserts move poleward. You know, the typical thing to say is wet gets wetter, dry gets drier, and there's my stationarity is dead. There's my British Airways Flight 9 story for you right there. This is out of the IPCC Special Report on Water in 2007. We already see all kinds of changes in the water cycle, from stream temperatures and lake temperatures to earlier runoff, to snowmelt reductions, to glacier melting. Wherever you look, you can see changes in our water cycle. And this is especially true of these snow-dominated areas in the American West. And on the left there is changes in runoff. And in some places, we actually expect to see runoff advance by up to 60 days at 2100, depending on how much carbon we actually emit into the atmosphere. And the lower right there is just the proportion of rain versus snow. And we're already seeing that change to more rain and less snow. You know, we're going to see a change in that hydrograph, that annual pattern of water, and this is consistent, and we're already seeing it. Here's an image from Boulder Creek near Oradell, to put it locally. That peak moves earlier, and in many places of the world it moves down. In some places where we're going to see more precipit, it moves up as well. Boulder has taken the lead in many ways, and it's been a pleasure to be a part of some of the studies that they have done on climate change to get people thinking about what this future where we can't rely on past records. You know, here's the The image in the lower left there is changes in annual runoff mid-century, and you can see those earthy colors in the American Southwest, the area in the U.S. where we expect to see reductions in runoff. And there in the Midwest, you can see those blue colors where we expect to see more. And then there's some more modeled results there by season in the upper right, which I won't take you through. So this is some of the work that Rich has been involved in, and I've been involved with a scientist in the name of Jeff Deems here and Tom Painter at Jet Propulsion Lab. And on the left there is an image of the San Juan Mountains in 2009. And what we have seen over the last, well, we actually haven't been studying this very long, so our data set's not all that long. But we seem to be seeing more dust being deposited on our springtime snowpack. And this dust causes earlier runoff and actually reductions in runoff. So what we think is that the Colorado River now is running off about 3 weeks earlier than it did pre-European settlement of the American West because of all kinds of grazing and land use changes in places like Arizona and Utah. 3 weeks earlier runoff, and we're also losing about 5% of the flow in the Colorado River, which is the same amount, it's about twice the amount of water that Las Vegas uses on an annual basis. 2 million people, we think we're losing twice that right now. And you can see the red line there is a dusty condition. That's an annual hydrograph. So the peak is the lower peak, and it's lower and it's shifted to the left, meaning it occurs earlier in the year. And a paper that's just been submitted suggests that if you add even more dust into this, we actually don't get much additional reduction in flow, but instead of 3 weeks earlier runoff, we actually get 6 weeks earlier runoff. And that leads to a real problem potentially with enhanced fires in the American West, which I'll talk about in a second. But before I get there, I want to talk about pine beetles and other kinds of beetles. That big red blotch there is 50 million acres, almost the size of Colorado and British Columbia, dead and dying due to pine beetles. And the blotch, I can't use a pointer on these screens, this red blotch right there is Colorado, which is a mere 3 million acres, but it's, I think anybody who lives in this state has been stunned by the rapidity of the changes there. Last summer, I had the privilege of spending 5 days in the Weminuche Wilderness near Durango, and I was stunned to find that the spruce beetle had been at work down here. And these are spruce trees dead from about 9,000 feet all the way up the tree line, everywhere we went for 5 days. It was quite amazing. What this means for the future, we don't know. Initially, there was some supposition that we might see enhanced runoff because of the lack of the trees actually taking up water, but that doesn't seem to be the case. A huge wild card as vegetation changes in the future. And here's my point about dust and earlier runoff. This is out of a study that was in Science, and I want to say 2006 by Tony Westerling. And the critical thing to note there is in that chart on the bottom, about midpoint, look at the red bars that go up. That's the number of wildfires. And then look at the black line. When the red bars are high, the black line is high. The black line is temperatures. And this correlation between high temperatures and enhanced wildfires in the West is very strong, and that's what this whole paper talked about. Since 1985, much longer fire seasons on both sides, earlier and later, bigger fires, more intense. And if you juxtapose this earlier talk about dust on snow and runoff, you kind of get an idea what the picture is. Those of us who lived here last summer and got to live through the fires, I think got an eye-opening example of that. I'm sure some of you live in South Boulder, where I live, where we were under pre-evacuation order for several days, and it certainly changes your opinion about the world. And you look at your belongings and the people you live with and you love and the fire that's over the hill, and wonder how it will change your life. Floods and droughts more common. Typical report out of water that we've been saying for years. Here's Bureau of Reclamation's guess on the future of the Colorado River. And that guess now is about a 10% reduction in flow by mid-century. This is a river that's already over-allocated, and there's going to be a real challenge to figure out who wins and who loses here. You can see on the left of that graph the historical red line, which is water use, and then the blue line, which is supply, and at about midpoint, vertically, they cross. So for the first time, about 2005, supply and demand met in the Colorado River. And you can see their projections going out where the red demand goes up and the blue supply, which is fuzzy because of our limited modeling ability, slowly goes down. We know water quality and groundwater are going to change. It's just part of the equation of this whole water cycle moving along. So Boulder actually did an interesting study with a whole bunch of scientists from AMEC and CU and NCAR. And it was a really interesting study because what it showed is that risks here included floods and fires. One of the fire risks is actually enhanced sediment that comes off, and we've now seen that up in Fort Collins as well, post the fire up there, and Denver Water has struggled with that, post-Hayman fire and the Buffalo Creek fire. What do we do about it? We're going to get to monitor it. We're going to work with the scientists to try and think ahead of time. One curious result, actually, and this just indicates the bizarre nature of how we handle water, is that Boulder might actually win as a result of this. It turns out it has very high senior water rights that come into priority in the springtime, and earlier runoff means that farmers potentially won't need that water. So these water rights that Boulder uses to store in its reservoirs up in the mountains here actually would be unimpeded. They would be allowed to store under climate change when historically they've not been allowed to store. It's just one of the odd, bizarre ways that climate change kind of upsets the table. And I'm going to just tell you that this is a piece that Jonathan Overpeck and I did in Science, a little brief perspective. It's 2 pages and more or less talks about what we've seen and what we're going to see going forward. I'm going to end right there and thank you all. Again, it's a pleasure to be here. This is an August organization. Thank you so much.
Brad's willing to take a couple questions if you have some.
Yes, sir.
Brad, I live up in Estes Park. I was here at the university.
You look familiar.
I'm sort of involved in occasionally helping progressives get into the Larimer County structure. And I've talked to them about the fact that the county should start to plan for decline in the water supply.
Yeah.
They will not bring that to the public. They say that's absolutely death in Larimer County to even talk about this. How do we get around it?
Here's my opinion on this. The models give us 2 results. So Colorado River, let's be fair. 30% of the models talk about increases in flow and 70% say declines. I think as scientists we have to be fair and say we do not have a crystal ball here. It's really hard to figure out what goes forward, but what we need to design are robust and really flexible systems. And the risk here isn't so much on more flow, which could occur, it's on the low flow side. And so, there are all kinds of things we can do within Colorado, including changes to water law, markets, sharing, interruptible supply contracts, to try and build more robust systems that can handle this variety of futures we might see. Water professionals, they're quite nervous and they won't admit that they have a real problem in public, but frequently in private they will go do good things. That's my advice, for what it's worth.
Thank you for your comments. They were edifying, and it's wonderful for us to hear the connection between research and what we see happening around us. I wonder if you have thoughts about ways to inject this information to decision makers who are not in the science community and to our classrooms so that young people start to learn these things for their life decisions.
I think in many places our educational system's doing well on this. Clearly at the university level it's doing well. I'm less knowledgeable about lower grades and kids' experience with climate change related education. On the policymaker level, listen, this issue, on some level is death in Washington, D.C., right? On the idea, though, of reductions of greenhouse gases, the adaptation front has seen some notable successes. And again, I would argue that major water providers in the West are talking and thinking about this. Doing is another matter. Doing, and in fact, let me mention, there's one piece of federal legislation that deals with climate change adaptation. There's only one piece. It's called the Secure Water Act. Jeff Bingaman passed it out, Energy and Natural Resources, the same committee my brother serves on. And that mandates that reclamation do a whole series of actions around climate change, including planning for energy, water supplies, water demands. And they have now finished, for example, in the Colorado River, a landmark 4-year study on what to do in the future. So you may not be aware about it, but people are thinking and stuff is going on behind the scenes. It would sure be easier if you could kind of have a much more adult conversation about this. But things are happening.
That's good to hear.
Take one more question.
I'll make a plug for a session and a short course that I'm doing at GSA in the fall, because it's relevant to the comments that came before. We're doing both a short course and a topical session on teaching controversial issues. And it's targeting K-16 educators, but there are lessons to learn from how people approach this for well or for good more broadly. So look for that in the program. And I'll also note that I live in Buffalo, and I find it striking that the first talk was kind of a plug for Boulder, and the second talk was kind of a plug for Buffalo.
So how many Boulderites here? I'm just curious. And how many non-Boulderites? Just terrific. Terrific. All right. Hey, you're lucky you weren't here on Tuesday. That's the only I will tell you. You are very lucky. Boulder pulled out its best, the rabbit out of the hat.
Thank you, Brad. Well, allow me to wrap up with a few thank yous. And of course, thank you to Brad for the great talk on the Western water and the issues that we face in the West, but actually across the country and across the world. And I do want to thank Andy and Brandon for being here and representing Representative Polis and Senator Udall. We appreciate that. And I want to thank all of you for attending and helping us celebrate our 125 years of science, stewardship, and service. I sort of shook up the staff earlier this week, or at least my meetings director, when I said, when we look back in the history of this organization, we can really trace our roots back to 1840. When a bunch of geologists got together and formed an organization that eventually became the AAAS, the American Association for Advancement Society, in 1848. And GSA split from the AAAS in 1888. So I said we were going to celebrate our 175th anniversary in 2 years. And I think I lost my entire meetings department. So a big thank you, of course, to Lisa Morgan-Mazel for chairing the committee for today's event, and the major individuals on the staff involved with that were Krista Stratton, Melissa Kaminsky, and Mary Kearns, who are the people who really drove it from the staff perspective. And of course, a big thank you to all of the GSA staff who put in a lot of extra time and effort in pulling off today's event. So thank you. We had a little bit of a brunch for them this morning and gave away a few tickets to Rockies games, so they appreciated that. So that ends our today's celebration. The celebration as far as the society, of course, continues throughout the year. We started out the beginning of the year with a cruise to Antarctica that was done jointly with the Jackson School of Geoscience in Austin, Texas. Today's events, we've got some field trips to Scotland, sponsored with our friends with the Geological Society of London, coming up in May, June, whatever the dates are. and on through the year with various other events. And we're trying to figure out exactly what we're going to do on December 27th, which is the actual birthday of the society, other than drinking champagne here at headquarters. So other than that, thank you for participating, and we appreciate everybody being here.